Today we're ranking every Pokemon game on the Switch from worst to best. And in dead last with arguably the worst Pokemon game ever made, Detective Pikachu returns. The first game came out for the 3DS in 2018. And it was a decent mystery game, especially if it was your first time playing the genre. But of course, what made this so popular was the release of the movie, which came out in 2019 and was pretty successful. And then we heard nothing until 2023, where this released out of nowhere. Almost like a mystery.
I finally got the last piece of evidence I need to figure out why this game was made. I knew it!
At its core, this is a simple mystery game, but it's also so much worse. The story takes place 2 years after the original. You play as Tim Goodman, the son of Detective Pikachu's former partner Harry, who alongside the help of Detective Pikachu works to uncover what happened to his dad, who mysteriously vanished. The gameplay is incredibly simple. You go to different locations throughout the world, solve mysteries, and try not to turn off your console while playing. I'm fine with this being a simple mystery game with a basic story because that's all it needs to be, but this is so simple that playing it is actually painful. All of the puzzles are wildly simple. You go to a location, talk to the people and Pokemon, and then figure out what happened. You have a journal where you write down theories of what happened, and at the end you pick one of the theories to see if you're right. But even if you get it wrong, Detective Pikachu just pops up and tells you that that's not right and has you pick again. And that is one of the stupidest things I have ever seen. They could have at least let you make that decision and let you figure out that you were wrong, which would have added a little bit more suspense or gameplay, something the game desperately needs. The puzzles are extremely boring, none of them have any actual challenge. The dialogue and cutscenes are painful to get through. And even though the story is pretty good, the hardest part of the game is sticking around long enough to see it through. And as it is, this is easily the worst Pokemon game on the Switch and arguably one of the worst ever made.
At this point, I would rather play Pokemon Dash. Now you're just saying that to be mean.
Pokemon Quest is a game that I liked slightly more than I thought I would. This is a Pokemon spin-off that I rarely hear people talk about because it released to a collective.
What is even that?
When this was first announced, I was really excited because I thought we were getting a brand new style of Pokemon Rumble. But I was completely wrong and stupid for thinking that. The story is practically non-existent, where a drone crashes onto Tumblecube Island and you have to explore it and find all of the precious loot that's available. You pick one of the starter Pokemon from Kanto and begin your journey, looting the island and going through a bunch of different levels. And from the surface, this seems like a great idea, but it was not executed well. This was not made for the Switch, and you can tell. It's a free-to-play mobile game, which is fine, but the game pretty much plays itself. The gameplay is very simple. You control up to 3 Pokemon who go through an island location in battle, and you choose when your Pokemon use one of their signature attacks. Or you can just let the Pokemon battle completely on their own, removing all of the gameplay to let the Pokemon do their thing. Each level has you fight waves of Pokemon that ends in a boss fight, and for a few hours the game is pretty entertaining, but after that there is nothing to do. This is full of all of the typical mobile game fluff like buying in-game currency or having to wait to play, that makes this very hard to enjoy for more than 5 minutes a day. The game is free to play, and this came out very early in the Switch's life, which was nice for people who didn't want to spend money on a new Pokemon game right out of the gate, but at its core, this is a mobile game that has barely any gameplay and can play itself. And as much as I like the art style, I still think free-to-play was too much to ask for what this is. And on a similar note, but slightly better, is Pokemon Café Remakes. Pokemon has made games for pretty much everything, including a ton of puzzle games. And Pokemon Café Remakes is absolutely one of the puzzle games that released.
I despise this.
The most glaring issue here is that this can only be played in handheld, and I will never understand why. I love the idea of being able to play this in handheld mode, especially because this was an app originally, but they should have done anything to make this so you could at least try and play it docked. Like any of the Pokemon puzzle games, your goal is to match as many Pokemon faces together as you can. Your Pokemon work at a cafe, and each of the levels is an order that a Pokemon is placing. And by doing one of these puzzles, you're making the order for the customer. And sometimes the customer will like your order so much that they'll join your team.
Hey, what can I get started for you? Hey, can I get a large caramel macchiato and a salaried position? Absolutely, coming right up.
The heart of the gameplay here is the puzzles, and honestly, they're fine. Each Pokemon is going to have a different ability that helps clear the board in various ways. There are obstacles on the board like sugar cubes and whipped cream that you need to destroy in order to progress, and there is something very satisfying about matching 100 different Pokemon together in order to clear the board. But at its core, this is still a free-to-play gacha game. It's currently still supported with updates and new content coming pretty frequently, but I still think they should do something like they did with Pokemon Rumble World and have the game be free to start, and then give you the option to buy the game outright to get rid of all of the gacha mechanics. I know it wouldn't make as much money, but it would be closer to what we used to get with games like Pokemon Troze, and it would make it so I might actually want to start playing these games again. But ultimately, Pokemon Quest and Café Remix both failed because they were free to play, and I'm not surprised we haven't seen another game like it since. Pokken Tournament is a very weird game because on one hand, this is exactly what I wanted from the Pokemon franchise, and on the other, I struggle to understand why it exists. This originally released for arcade cabinets in Japan, eventually getting ported to the Wii U, where it did decently well and then was never looked at again. While the arcade cabinets kept getting updates like new characters and stages, the Wii U version was left to rot. But then we got the release of Pokken Tournament DX on the Switch, bringing most of the changes and quality of life upgrades to the Switch. I'm a fan of fighting games, even if I'm not the best at them, and this is pretty good. There are a few game modes, and most of them function in the same way, where the battle is broken up into two parts, the first of which being a 3D arena fighter, which allows you to navigate the full arena battling to your heart's content, and then there's the 2D section, which only allows you to move left and right. At first this threw me off, but the more I've played, the more I've come to like it. This is much more of a typical fighting game compared to something like Smash, and if you're a fan of competitive fighting games like Street Fighter or Tekken, I am sure you would love this. But for the average person, and even as a fan of fighting games, this just didn't hit the mark. There was a wave of DLC that released a few new fighters, but outside of that, there was nothing else added. I bought this on both the Wii U and the Switch, and I had a good time when I was playing it, but they never gave me a reason to pick it back up. And it's a shame because there was some cool concepts here that never got fully utilized. All of the battles were themed off of a news broadcast, and I thought that was an interesting idea. And they could have had limited time breaking news events that gave you a reason to pick this game up after you bought it, but outside of the core fighting, there was nothing to do. And that's not to say the fighting was bad, because it was very good, and it had a weird but good selection of playable Pokemon, almost like they randomly picked some of these out of a hat. But because there was nothing to do outside of the fighting, there was no reason to play the game. And it's a shame because I would love to see another one of these made in the future.
Hey, I desperately need a copy of Pokken Tournament. No, you don't. Oh, but No, you don't.
Even though it shames me to my core to admit it, I very much enjoy Pokemon Unite.
Give me your Switch. Hey, you are banned from playing games.
Pokemon Unite is a simple multiplayer online battle arena that released for the Switch and for mobile devices. It's a free-to-play game, and as much as I am not a fan of that model, for this instance, it works pretty well. This is a diet version of a game like League of Legends or Dota 2, where you and your team are tasked with getting to the other team's base by fighting wild Pokemon and the other team to collect orbs to destroy their towers. But instead of the typical towers that you would do damage to in order to progress, this time you dunk orbs.
Success!
This is a great entry-level MOBA, and even as someone who has far too many hours in Dota 2, I still find this very enjoyable. There's a good variety of Pokemon to choose from, and they keep adding more over time. And even though it takes 45 minutes to turn the game on whenever you want to play, when you do get to actually playing, it's pretty enjoyable. This is one of the rare exceptions where I think being a free-to-play game works pretty well. The cosmetics and characters are definitely overpriced, I'm not defending that, but outside of one purchase I made shortly after launch, I haven't spent $1 on this game in years, and I'm still having fun with it to this day. It's not a perfect game by any means, but if Pokemon is going to continue to make free-to-play games, I want them to make more like this, and less like Café Remix. Way back on the Nintendo 64, we got Pokemon Snap, a game where you take pictures of Pokemon, and for the time, it was the best looking Pokemon game ever made. But then we didn't get a single new game in the franchise until New Pokemon Snap.
That name is accurate?
After 20 years of waiting, I was finally given a game that I thought would never come. And it ended up being exactly what I wanted. Like the original, it's an on-rail shooter where you're taking pictures of Pokemon. The gameplay is simple but rewarding because every time I take a picture, I feel like I could do a little bit better. The more you play, the more options you get to set Pokemon up for the best photo possible. There's a loose story where you're assisting Professor Mirror to figure out why Pokemon are starting to glow in the Lentil region. Though the core gameplay remains mostly the same, there were a couple changes to make everything seem nicer, like them explicitly stating that the apples you're throwing at Pokemon are light and airy so it's not going to hurt them, and removing the idea of the Pester Ball from the original, which was literally just a ball that was made to annoy Pokemon, we now have Illumina Balls which have a various effect depending on what Pokemon's hit with them, but the biggest change is the fact that you can now scan around you to see Pokemon or alternate paths you can take, which is a nice touch that makes it so I don't miss a Pokemon I want to get a picture of. At the end of a level, you're given a grade on the pictures you take, and the grading system itself is more detailed than ever. New Pokemon Snap is far from a groundbreaking game, but what it does nail is the atmosphere of the world you're in. Whether it's the Pokemon or the environments that you explore, everything looks stunning. It is the perfect laid-back Pokemon game for just taking it easy. The low stakes and high replayability make it a very fun game for just sitting back and relaxing. And though it doesn't have the most content, just like the original, I plan on playing this for years to come. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl are some of the worst main series Pokemon games that we have ever gotten. And it's a shame because Sinnoh is one of the best Pokemon regions of all time. I have been very critical on these in the past, and yes, I stand by everything I have ever said about them, but they are still a main series Pokemon game, which at least makes them pretty good. The problem is, I think they went the wrong direction with what these games should be. I think going for a style similar to what they went for on the DS was a good idea. The chibi art style works decently well, but they didn't go far enough in either direction to make it really stand out. They should have either went more the direction of Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, where it kept the idea of what Kanto should look like, but upscaled it to make it look like a next generation game, or the complete other direction where they made a game that looks similar to Octopath Traveler and the Dragon Quest HD remakes. But as it stands, this just looks like a DS game got forced onto the Switch. To be fair, this was not made by Game Freak, it was made by ILCA, a different company altogether, so I can understand why this didn't have the same attention to detail that other games did, but it just looks weird the way it is. But the thing they did do very well was the gameplay. The core Pokemon mechanics feel great here. If you grew up with Diamond and Pearl, then this experience was going to hit close to home because it was pretty much the exact same thing. Of course, there were quality of life changes like new moves and the addition of fairy types, but these were always meant to be faithful remakes, and the gameplay is where that shines the most. And for some people, that's exactly what they wanted, but for me and a lot of other Pokemon fans, this just wasn't enough. Every other Pokemon remake that we have ever gotten has added some sort of additional new content. It could be a new area to explore like the Sevi Islands, or a callback to a fan favorite game like the Delta episode in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, but all we got here were changes to how the underground works and the ability to walk with Pokemon. And don't get me wrong, I love walking with my Pokemon as much as the next guy.
But where's the rest?
Diamond and Pearl weren't perfect games to begin with. A lot of the things that people love Sinnoh for came in Pokemon Platinum. There was still an over-reliance on weird HMs like Defog. There was a staggering lack in the variety of Pokemon, not only for you as a trainer, but for the gym leaders and Elite Four members who have weird, obscure Pokemon that don't fit their team. And of course, no additional content to make the remake feel worth it. At the end of the day, they did do some good things like adding character customization and outfits, making it so HMs aren't required to take up a Pokemon's move slot, and changes to the Elite Four to make them even scarier than ever. But compared to every other Pokemon remake that we have ever gotten, this is just disappointing. Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu were games I didn't expect to like, but ultimately did a little bit. Like pretty much everyone in the world, I got cripplingly addicted to Pokemon Go when it released, and I still play it from time to time. But not for a single moment while playing it did I ever think I wanted these mechanics in a mainline game. But in their infinite wisdom, the Pokemon Company decided,
Alright team, we're gonna make Kanto again, except we're gonna fill it with Pokemon Go mechanics for money. No, why would you even say that? We should put all of our efforts into making the next generation of Pokemon the best it can be. Yeah, you, what's your name? You're fired.
I'll be honest, I think it was a good idea to try and capitalize on the success of Pokemon Go by making a full game that utilized the mechanics. It's a very simplified version of Pokemon, which is great for both newcomers and people who haven't played the series in a very long time. And I am fine with that idea, but this just further nails home the fact that Pokemon needs to have a difficulty selection just like it did in Black and White 2. All of the problems I have with this game could have been fixed if this was just the easy mode and they had a standard mode which was more or less the same Pokemon experience fans had come to know and love in every other game. Because as someone who has played pretty much every Pokemon game ever released, it was just too simple. It did do some things really well though. First off, the game looks beautiful. This is the best looking Pokemon game that we have ever gotten outside of maybe Pokemon Scarlet and Violet on the Switch 2. All of the routes and towns look stunning, and I think if Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl took this art style, people would have a lot less mean things to say. Unlike other Kanto remakes, this is a remake of Pokemon Yellow, except for some reason they decided to split it in two. I wonder why they could have done that. Depending on the version you pick, you get either Pikachu or Eevee, and both of them are absolutely busted in this game. In order to make them usable throughout the entirety of the game, they get moves that are absolutely disgusting, and you could easily beat through the entire game only ever using your starter Pokemon. The way you encounter Pokemon has been completely reworked from games in the past, completely removing the random encounter in favor of a brand new system where you'll walk into a Pokemon if you want to battle them and completely ignore them if not, which is genuinely one of the best changes that Pokemon has ever made. Trying to hunt down a specific Pokemon with a small encounter rate has always been a nightmare. But now if you see a Pokemon, you can just choose to battle them, or you can completely ignore all Pokemon on your route and not need to spend all of your money on repels. Just like in Pokemon Yellow, you'll see anime characters like Jesse and James in the game, and you can easily obtain all 3 of the Kanto starters in your playthrough, which is nice if you want to live out your fantasies trying to be Red. Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu were so close to being great games if they had just included something to make it more challenging for people who have been playing for a long time. And though I don't love a lot of the changes that were made here, like removing most of the substance that makes Pokemon what it is, I still think it was a great idea to get people who haven't played Pokemon in a long time back into the series. And if at least one person played this and then got into other games in the series, I feel like it's an absolute win. One of my favorite spin-offs in the entire franchise got a new game on the Switch, kind of. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon is a series that I love to death. And though this is just a remake of the originals, I still love this game. I fully recognize the Mystery Dungeon series is an acquired taste. Exploring dungeons of randomly generated floors to find Pokemon in need is something that not a lot of people are going to love.
And if you don't like it, I get it. But you're wrong.
In this series, you play as a human who turned into a Pokemon with no memory as to how he became one. At the start of your adventure, you meet a friendly Pokemon who becomes your partner, and together you form a rescue team with the goal of saving Pokemon in need. Pokemon from around the world will give you a job, and you and your partner go and tackle that job together. Most of the main jobs have you going through a randomly generated dungeon to save a Pokemon, but there's also a ton of smaller jobs that have you going to a specific floor of a cave in order to deliver or find a lost item. The further you get into the game, the stronger your Pokemon become, but the harder the missions get, which comes together to create a rewarding gameplay loop that had me coming back for hours on end. Being a remake of the original, I was curious how much they were going to change and what they were going to leave the same. Of course, the artwork is the biggest and most noticeable change, going from a pixelated art style from the Game Boy and DS to an almost hand-drawn storybook aesthetic that I love. But they also made some other changes, like changing how recruiting Pokemon works, and an auto mode which is very similar to Pokemon Quest, where the game just plays itself for you.
What are you doing? What does it look like? I'm playing a game.
I have put countless hours into the entire Mystery Dungeon franchise, and I plan to do so again in the future. And though this is the most recent, it's still not the one I would recommend playing first. If you own a Switch and have Nintendo Switch Online and want to get into the series for the first time, then I would play Red Rescue Team on there before you try and hop into a fully priced remake. But if you like it a little bit and you want to see it through, then I think this is absolutely worth it. Pokemon Sword and Shield brought us the first new generation on the console, and with it brought a ton of brand new changes, the most important of which being a load of angry fans.
Why does it look like that?
Prior to release, this game was plagued with bad press around every corner. Whether it was the tragedy known as Dexit, or the fact that the graphics didn't look as good as people thought, even before you could put your hands on it, people were saying this was going to flop. But as a fan, I had to play it for myself to see if it was going to be that bad, and honestly, it's not. Pokemon games tend to go through a cycle where for a few years after release, everybody says that these games are awful and you should never play them, but after about 5 or 10 years, the public perception begins to switch seemingly overnight. That's not to say that Sword and Shield are perfect, but there are a lot of things that I genuinely love about these games. The introduction of the wild area was a cool idea, and it was decently fun even if it was a little bit lifeless. Going through a big open area habitat for Pokemon and seeing them wander around was an awesome idea. And keeping the changes to random encounters from Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu was a great idea. But the best part of the wild area by far were the Dynamax raids. These were giant multiplayer boss battles that had you and friends competing to take down a giant Dynamax Pokemon. And this was by far the best part of this game because you and friends could take on a giant Pokemon raid battle together. And though it could be written off to whatever was going on in the world globally at the time, I put a bunch of hours into raid battles with friends and had a great time doing it. Outside of the wild area, there were still routes and towns like any of the other Pokemon games in the past, and aesthetically they were really nice looking, even if substance-wise there wasn't a lot to do in them. Most of the caves and forests were extremely bare bones, though very enjoyable, but the core Pokemon formula still felt great, even if the gimmick was a big swing and a miss. Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing were this region's gimmick, and honestly I think it was fine. Your Pokemon would grow to a massive size for 3 turns, and it worked well, but it also seems like they included this gimmick just for the sake of having a gimmick in the game. The story does explain why Dynamaxing is happening, specifically in Dynamax dens, but it never felt as substantial as something like Mega Evolutions or even Z-moves.
Just saying Z-moves makes me want to vomit.
The big problem with it though is that the story was very one note. Most, if not all, of the events in the story just kind of happen randomly, and major story events happen off screen and you just hear about it through text. So if you go into it expecting the best Pokemon story of all time, you're going to be disappointed. But the region you explore, the battling, and specifically the Dynamax raids more than make up for it, especially if you go out and buy the DLC, which just adds more of everything that I already liked. I will die on the hill that Sword and Shield is one of the most underappreciated Pokemon games of all time. And if you haven't checked it out yet, I think you should. And just like Sword and Shield, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is a very divisive game. I think the same rule will apply where over time people are going to become much more accepting of what this game offers, but from the first look at this game in the trailers, people were very confused.
I'm just impressed they managed to make a game that looks like they got it to run on the Dreamcast.
On the original Switch, Scarlet and Violet ran horribly. Frame rate drops, stuttering, and lag made this borderline unplayable for the first few weeks it was out. And though it got slightly better with updates, everything about this game just didn't feel good. But beyond the rough performance, what is there works so well. At no point can I defend the state that this game launched in. It was unacceptable for a AAA Pokemon game to look and play like this. And with all of that being said, I still love Scarlet and Violet.
But the game has flaws. You have to hate it. I don't think that's true. Oh, is that how that works?
This was the first time that Pokemon jumped into a full open world. And it is far from perfect, but this is exactly the direction I've always seen the series going. What they were going for was a seamless open world, and in that capacity it works. That did come at the cost of towns and routes not feeling as deep as they used to, and the fact that you can no longer just enter someone's house.
Hi, you have a nice house. What are you doing? Nothing. Get out.
But there's something that I love about being able to go wherever I see. It still needs a lot of work, but I spent so much time exploring everywhere I could in this world. Whether I was hunting down herds of wild Pokemon or just picking up items like E.T. finding Reese's Pieces, I kept exploring the world because it was fun to do it. The battles are extremely fun, especially with the new gimmick of terastallization, which is fun for both competitive players and for people who just want to explore the game. The gimmick added the ability for gym leaders to bring in obscure Pokemon they may not have used otherwise, but it ends up working because their Terra type is the same type as the gym. And I had a good amount of fun with all 3 of the main branches of the story, whether it was hunting down Team Star, helping Arven collect the Herba Mystica, or just beating gym leaders until they cry. But most importantly, they took something that worked in Sword and Shield and made it better, with Terra raids being a better version of the already great Dynamax raids. There's consistently new events going on to get Pokemon, and whether I had 1 or 100 hours in the game, I still found myself doing these Terra raids because they were so much fun. I know the new generations of Pokemon on the Switch have gotten a bad rap, and I'm not saying these games are perfect by any means, but a lot of these new features, especially these raid battles, have changed how we play Pokemon. They are great for playing by yourself or with friends, and that is exactly what I have always wanted out of the series. And outside of a few extremely valid complaints about the story and world design, I think both Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet are still good games. And similar to how The Legend of Zelda still makes a top-down Zelda experience all these years later, I think the Pokemon Company could easily make these open-world, grand, ambitious games while still making games more in line with Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. But the best Pokemon game on the Switch is not like any of these games. It paved its own route being something completely different with Pokemon Legends Arceus. It's weird to think that Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, Legends Arceus, and Scarlet and Violet all came out within about a year. And where Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were developed by a different company, this was handled entirely by Game Freak, where you play as a character who got sent back to the past with God's phone. The game takes place in the past in a region known as Hisui. Though it's called Hisui, this is just the Sinnoh region of the past. And though there are some familiar things, this feels like an entire new location. Ever since Gold and Silver, people have been asking the Pokemon Company to try something new. And though they've attempted it with spin-offs, they've never really changed the fundamental Pokemon formula of turn-based battles and catching. But in Legends Arceus, everything feels wildly different. The gameplay is like a real-time Safari Zone, where you can bait Pokemon, sneak around, and throw balls at them. And though the experience at first is a little bit strange, it is an incredible change of pace. Instead of walking into a Pokemon and starting a turn-based battle, now if you want to start a battle, you have to throw your Pokeball at the Pokemon. Because if you decide to walk into it, it will just attack you. The gameplay changes might not be for everyone, but as someone who wants the Pokemon Company to try new things and experiment, this is exactly what I love to see. Once you receive the Arc Phone, you get brought into a town because literally everyone just saw you fall from the sky, and instead of the typical Pokemon warm welcome where everyone wants to be your friend, these people are understandably skeptical. And as you make your slow walk through town for the first time, everyone's scared. And you have to earn their respect by joining the Survey Corps, a group of people who are trying to figure out why there is a giant interdimensional gateway just hanging out above a mountain.
What is that? I think it's a cloud.
This has by far the best story of any Pokemon game available on the Switch, the most rewarding gameplay whether you're crafting Pokeballs to use on Pokemon or sneaking around trying to get the perfect angle. Even the battles themselves got reworked to give a new feel, with agile and strong moves giving a brand new perspective on how Pokemon battles can be fought. And of course, one of the best parts of this game is that you go into boss battles on your own, and you will throw bags of rocks at a Pokemon until it submits, and then and only then are you able to battle it. This is also a standalone Pokemon game, so you don't have to trade Pokemon in order to complete your Pokédex, making this the most accessible single-player Pokemon game on the Switch. And I would love to see more Pokemon games try something new like this again in the future.